In the past few years, artificial intelligence has advanced so quickly that it now seems hardly a day goes by without an AI headline. There is no doubt that AI will lead us into the largest of all tech revolutions. And such times are particularly frightening. My belief is that in the long run, we will find equilibrium, but the transition in the short term will be tough for a lot of people, including you and me. And today I'm going to tell you why I feel optimistic about AI. So let's start with a brief introduction to AI, kind of what I think AI means. Versions of AI have been around for decades. The term artificial intelligence was first coined in 1956, even though it seems very new right now. It was in 1956 at a conference in Hanover. Since then, AI has gone through several hype cycles. We have seen AI winters when the hype would wane down and then rise up again. I studied AI back in the early 90s, and at that time, there was not much we could do beyond theory. But now, in the past few years, AI is everywhere. And this time around, AI is making significant progress. And there are two primary factors which is helping AI make tremendous progress: data and compute. One is the enormous amounts of data available. Now that we do so many things online, every action gets recorded and stored, adding valuable data that can help AI. The Internet of Things is putting sensors on people, in cars, in nature, and capturing massive amounts of data, which was not possible several years ago. To analyze that data and feed it into AI software takes enormous computing power, which has now become easily available through cloud companies. But before we get there, let me just level set on how I think about the levels or types of AI, because there's a lot of hype we hear in the media, and there's actual reality of what AI is capable of doing. Think of it as three types. Artificial narrow intelligence is a form of AI that is equivalent or better than human intelligence at solving a very specific narrow problem, like playing chess. Artificial general intelligence is intelligence that matches human level intelligence to solve any kind of problem that an average human can solve intellectually. And artificial superintelligence is smarter than the best human brains in practically every field, including scientific, artistic, general knowledge, and social skills. When you read about AI, a lot of the hype is around the artificial superintelligence, and the reality is very much in artificial narrow intelligence in most of the fields. Like, for example, computer vision, drones that pilot themselves. These things are real, but they're doing very narrow, specific tasks. They're using huge amounts of data as well as lots of processing power to solve problems that before we would have thought only a human being could do. And I think artificial narrow intelligence will truly evolve and reach its limits in every aspect in the next decade based on the software and analytic techniques we have today, whether it be machine learning or neural networks and the compute power available today. However, even today, we don't have the software or hardware needed to build artificial superintelligence. The way in which the human brain works is actually very different than the way computers work. Human brain is incredibly complex. Building the software and analytic techniques to mimic our brain is unbelievably challenging. So what seems really simple and easy for us, for humans to do, is extremely complex and difficult to program and compute. Another thing that I would like to point out is also how to think about AI. Think about AI that is extending human intelligence. The invention of the steam engine last century allowed people to achieve more than what they could do with just their human muscle power or physical capability. So it generated enormous quantities of energy that could be stored and reused and resulted in factories, mass production, railways, and mass transportation. It really changed the world as people knew it at that time. And what's happening today is AI is doing the same thing for human mental power or human intellectual. Think of it as an extension and arsenal in your tool that helps you do some of the tasks that don't need much intelligent human intelligence. With that background, let me share a few stories of what I have seen working across several industries and functions in large enterprises and also at startups. So this is a story from a manufacturing plant. My data science team worked with the IT teams there to gather the data from all the PLC and MES systems to get the data from the machines and built the best machine learning models to predict when a large CNC machine would reach a heating threshold and fail. Simple enough, right? Taking massive amounts of data, finding the correlations, and then predicting. I'm oversimplifying, but the point is that we were able to build software after several months to act with actually very high accuracy of 99.999% accuracy. We deployed it to the factory floor, very excited. And here's what happened. None of the factory floor workers were willing to use it. They did not trust a software to tell them when a machine that they had been using their entire life would fail. They did not trust a software could do it, right? These were mostly factory floor workers who did not understand AI, who had only heard about the hype around AI and data, and they did not think it valuable to use software, and they just ignored it. So at that point, that is a failed project, because you could build the best AI solution that is the most accurate thing and can help you in your job, but if nobody uses it, it's a failed project. What we had to do was then really make sure, and it was a lesson that I learned early on, was to make sure that your end users are open to accepting AI, they're trained for it, and they have motivation to use it. So everybody in an organization has to be brought into the need of AI and also explained as to how it helps them in their job, right? So what we walked away with on this specific instance was to really gamify the AI solution, meaning we motivated the employees to actually use AI to give feedback so that there was incentives provided to drive adoption of AI. So the first lesson that I would like to share with you today is really, as we think about AI, for an organization to succeed in its use of AI, everybody across the organization has to understand that why AI is being brought in and how it helps them do their job better, or what the path is there, right? Another story that I would like to share is really around working with an aviation company, right? We were trying to predict when a jet engine might fail so that you could proactively then fix that, send in a field service engineer to go fix that engine so that there is no unplanned downtime and there is no flight delays. Simple enough, right? So we started looking at the data coming off the engines, and also looking at the service records, when the engine was serviced, what were some of the past issues, what was similar behavior patterns that we've seen in other engines that had failed. So really doing the data discovery phase to identify the parameters needed to be able to predict when that engine would fail. At a high level, it was absolutely valuable to the business. As we started looking at the data and going through the data discovery phase, what we found was there were additional correlations. We were able to see not only when the jet engine would fail, but we could see, how the pilot flew the plane would actually impact the corrosion of the engine, resulting in frequent failures of the jet engine. This raised a unique challenge because now you can actually see pilot performance and employee performance that could potentially impact their performance review, because pilots are trained to fly it in a certain way. And if they're, say, for example, hitting the thrust harder, right? That is not within the range that they're supposed to hit it in. And we had to go back and see, yeah, obviously the airlines wanted that information so that they could use it to train the pilots better. But what we also learned is there is no policies and regulation. When we went to FAA, the Flight and Aviation Organization, there is no policies and regulations that exist for these kind of additional correlations that you might find. So two things I would like to point out here is that we are living in this interesting phase of AI where the core technology of AI is still evolving, meaning whether it's the next wave of neural networks or deep learning, the core technology, quantum computing, all these technologies are still evolving. There is a parallel stream of the applications of the technology that's evolving, where AI is being used across functions, across industries, right from manufacturing and aviation to finance and marketing. It's used across all these different segments while the core technology is still evolving. And then there is a third stream, parallel stream, which is also still growing, is the risks or consequences of that technology. We don't have all the policies or regulations figured out. There is no standard playbook of how to use AI. There's a lot of work that's still happening in that space. So think of it as three parallel streams of how AI technology, the applications, and the risks and consequences are evolving, and why it's important to be more actively involved, which I'll come to in a short while. Another example, again, from a factory floor. This one was really using image recognition to identify quality issues. Like if a part that was being manufactured, if you could identify that there was going to be a quality issue, to identify it early on so that you could take it off the production line and save, right? What we saw was there was, and we had these sensors installed, we had the algorithm built to actually identify these quality issues. As we started implementing the software, what we saw was that there was a certain batch where you were using a certain batch of raw materials that always resulted in bad quality of these parts. Now, there's only so much a software can do. So we started going back and seeing, why is this one batch having consistent failure when you're using raw material from this batch? And what we saw was where the raw material was stored, there was a window high up that was projecting sunlight onto this specific area of where the raw materials were stored. And that was resulting in this bad quality issues. And here is why that's why I think, humans are always going to be needed in the loop. This is not something that an image recognition software could have looked around it to figure out what, when the sunlight came in and where it was hitting. Humans, based on where we are with AI today, humans are very much in the loop. We are seeing AI being more, think about it more as AI being augmented intelligence. It's giving us access to information that we would have to put in tedious hours of work to pour through data. But at the end of the day, humans are really, really important to be able to train, build, and guide AI as it is being developed. The last one that I would like to talk about today is that there is a popular myth that AI will take away jobs. And some even fear that as AI improves, it will replace workers and create an ever-growing pool of unemployable humans who cannot compete with machines. Part of the reason is that it is easier to see existing jobs disrupted by new technology than to envision what new jobs the technology will enable. That it is much easier to see it in the context of existing jobs. But on the other hand, technology advances aren't a new phenomenon. Let me tell you two stories actually around this. One is around gas station attendants. So 60 years ago, every gas station had human attendants who filled gas into your car. You just pulled in and they would come and ask you questions and then go fill the gas, right? In 1964, a gas station installed a robot, an electric box that a store owner could use to activate any gas pump outside, and the customer could fill gas for himself. And this was just the beginning of self-serve pumps. And over the next 30 years, stations across the nation installed these robots and fired the human gas attendants. By the 2000s, the gas attendant job had pretty much disappeared. That's hundreds of thousands of jobs gone, right? The loss of those jobs was devastating for the gas attendants, but the broader impact to society has been pretty positive. As has happened throughout the history of automation, some jobs got destroyed by automated gas pumps, but new and often better jobs were created. Attendants went away, but to make the sophisticated pumps, companies hired software developers, engineers, salespeople, and project managers. Station owners took their extra profits and turned their stations into mini marts, which needed shop managers, and built more gas stations, which needed more pumps. And those companies then hired more people. Customers spent less money on gas because they weren't paying for the gas attendant to pump it. That left them more money for iPhones or ordering stuff on phone apps, which in turn led to creating more new kinds of employment. Obviously, I'm oversimplifying it, but you get the gist of what I'm saying. A generation of gas station attendants disappeared, but the automation sent some clear signals that relying on such unskilled jobs isn't a great career plan. Those signals actually, if you look back at data, led to more parents encouraging their kids to go to college. Economists have shown time and time again that AI and automation helps overall standards of living rise, literacy rates improve, average lifespan lengthens, and crime rates fall. You all already use math and statistics to estimate the financial impact of uncertainty and help clients minimize risk. I don't have to really explain this to you. You know the numbers here. Well, let's look at something more recent. Just look at the internet. 25 years ago, in 1993, the web browser Mosaic had just been released. If someone had asked what would be the result of connecting a billion computers into a giant network, most would have predicted that email would cause us to mail, to post fewer letters, and the internet will cause us to read fewer newspapers. And based on those assumptions, one would assume that the internet would destroy jobs. But now we know what really happened. The obvious changes did occur, but a slew of unexpected changes happened as well. Dozens of new careers emerged, right from web designer to data scientist to SEO expert to domain experts who understand AI. Internet has become an integral part of our lives. I wouldn't be able to speak to you today if we didn't have the internet. Would we have survived this pandemic if we didn't have the internet? But yes, we do mail fewer letters and buy fewer newspapers. The takeaway for me here is lifelong learning is going to be crucial, no matter what profession you are in. As I said, when I studied AI, there was no way to implement it, to try out, but it's become real. It's practical now. There's also new jobs that got created in my own field. When I was studying computer science, there was no role or no title called iOS developer. And today, it's one of the highest paid jobs. So new roles get created and we have to evolve and change and keep learning. Lifelong learning is absolutely crucial. Over and over again, the AI economy will invent work we can't even dream of today, much as the internet gave birth to unforeseen careers. Working with AI can help us overcome limitations and help us do what we do better. So, this is not a new phenomenon in the history of mankind, as you can see, but it is one that we must adapt to both new and different challenges. Smarter machines make for smarter people. Since we, as humans, are the ones developing AI, let's develop AI in a way to augment and work with humans. Let's build AI in a way that AI will make us all be better humans. Let's all be part of the AI journey. Thank you.
Beena, thank you so much. I wish you could have seen my face during your presentation because I found it so insanely interesting. I wrote down a whole lot of questions that I want to ask you, so I'll try not to bombard you too much. But my first question that I have for you was about your first example, which I loved. You told an example about factory floor workers, and a model was built to tell them, I think it was when something would overheat. And this model was great. They rolled it out, but nobody wanted to use it.
Yeah.
Yeah, we see that all the time in the actuarial world. It's a common problem that we have. And my question for you is about training of models. Who is the right person then to train, in this case, the factory floor workers, right? For actuaries, it would be the users of our model. Is it the data scientists who build these models, but they don't know the factory floor job? Is it the factory floor worker who should train their peers? Like, how do you, what tips can you give us for training others on how to use these great models that we are building?
Yeah, yeah. And, I think, again, it's one of those things because data scientist has been called the sexiest job of the century and has got all these labels, they're highly paid. There is a belief that data scientists can solve for everything. But what I've seen in my experience, domain experts, right, the end users who are using that software, who are using the models on a day-to-day basis, have to work really closely with the data scientists to not only the training afterwards, but also to build the best models because you need that domain expertise. You need the manufacturing plant, the factory floor worker to provide his or her inputs as the model is being built. So I think getting them engaged early on rather than waiting till it's fully developed and then pushing out something. I think getting the user engaged early on is something that's really important. And then the other one on the training side, it's a partnership between the both the teams, because you still need to make sure that your models are performing and are delivering, because that you cannot hand it over to the manufacturing team and help them have them do it. So it's a combination. The best data science teams are ones where you have the subject matter experts and the data scientists working together.
Yeah, okay. I love that. How do you recommend that leaders get trained on this? So we have this influx of artificial intelligence, data science. A lot of our experts are coming right out of university, right? But then we've got this top level of leaders. How do they learn about the models and even just the language, the technical language? Do you have advice for us in that space? Because I think we've got a whole generation of actuaries who are looking to learn.
Yeah. I am a huge believer that everybody should be AI literate. Meaning, when you read a newspaper article, at the very minimum, you should understand what do some of these terms mean? What does deep learning really mean? What does machine learning mean? And what is it really doing in the background? I think it's AI literacy is super important, not only for leaders, but for everybody on the team who may not even be part of the data science team. So for leaders, there are quite a few classes and courses now, which is talking about AI for executives or AI for business leaders. So being proactive and taking some of those classes is super important. I've also seen organizations now rolling it out across the entire organization to make everybody AI literate. There's this notion that you need to understand the exact details of how a machine learning model works or which library to use. And trust me, you don't, right? We did, when we try to make this data scientist a unicorn who understands domain, subject matter expertise, and the technical part of it, it doesn't work. So as leaders, you need to be AI literate. You need to stay current. I think that's the other important thing. First is, understanding the basic core concepts of AI. And then secondly, the being current on what's happening with these technology. What are some of the industry use cases? What are some of my peers doing, right? Following thought leaders in this space, just staying abreast, because as I said, this technology and its application and its risk are all growing parallelly at a fast pace. So I think leaders need to be aware of the developments and also the core AI literacy.
Yeah, in my experience, having leaders be knowledgeable and interested and invested in AI is so important. So, can you give us advice on what an AI oriented C-suite should look like? Like, what should we aspire to, or what components are essential to keep in mind from the top to enable these AI projects and processes the greatest chance to succeed?
Yeah, but there are two models that I've worked in and I've seen. One is really, having a chief AI officer, bringing in into the C-suite somebody whose whole focus is AI and is looking across the entire business and identifying opportunities to either roll out new products or to drive more savings, cost savings. So more revenue coming in or reducing costs, right? So the chief AI officer kind of lays the foundation of, what are some of the big projects to work on, which functions should be using which AI tools, infusing AI across the organization, right? So that's where, the chief AI officer role, it kind of becomes a change maker to drive the change for the organization. I've also seen where it comes through a business or a function. In one of my roles, it actually originated within the marketing function. No surprise there, because there's massive amounts of data that you need to do to drive personalized targeted ads, right? So the marketing department championed the need for AI, hired the first data scientist, and kind of started showing value, which drove to the larger change within the organization. So there is no one answer to it. I think if you are the CEO of a company and really want to use some of the newer technologies that your peers or your competitors might be using, I think starting with a chief AI officer is a great idea. The other one is really, if you're seeing one of your business leaders who's triggering this change, really be supportive of it.
I know 40,000 actuaries who think that an actuary is the perfect person to fill a chief AI officer role. No, I hear you on that. Okay, one other thing, another example that I want to hit on that really spoke to me was the example that you told about the gas station attendants.
Yeah.
And I think that your point was that AI will eliminate some roles, but it will create others, right? So one of the things that we do as actuaries is when we start out of college and begin to do our actuarial work, we do a lot of that grunt work. We do a lot of that, the stuff that can get automated, right? And the fear that I have, and probably what many actuaries think about, is that if those jobs are automated, how do we learn? How do we develop the judgment that we will need for the more advanced roles? So can you just talk a little bit about that? Once AI takes over some automation, how do we learn?
Yeah. So one statement that I usually speak to is, if there is a part of your job that can be done with less than 30 seconds of your brain power, it is either already automated or will get automated in the next 2 years. And as AI technology evolves, it's like, over time, it might be what takes less than 1 minute or 2 minutes of your brain power. It is going to get automated. We are living in that world. There is no escaping it, right? I do understand that, you need to do more hands-on to learn and become as you grow in your career. what we've seen is also it gives you that ability, it gives you the time to actually uh, and this is, I have not been an actuary, so I'm just speaking based on my experience. What I've seen is it kind of pushes you to learn more about what the model, the algorithm is doing, how is that getting automated, right? It's you, if you are one of those actuaries who takes the initiative, you could be the one designing and guiding the data science team to say, these are the parts of my job that need to be automated. In that way, you're still involved, you're driving the change, and you still know the skill, you're still developing your own skill set. So getting involved in the automation process early on is actually a good way to keep learning and also show your initiative and leadership skills. The reality is it is going to get automated.
And I suppose that even once something is automated, it's still needed to look after that model, continue to evolve that model, continue to check it that it's still doing what it's supposed to do, and make improvements. So, right.
Yeah, there's absolutely, and then the next wave, right? I think we are, if something that has been automated saved 30 seconds of your brain power, I think it's a challenge to the actuaries because it cannot come from the data scientist. Okay, how can I automate something that is taking 1 minute of my brain power, right? How do you keep expanding that scope and continuously testing and evolving it? And honestly, actuaries are the original data scientists, aren't they?
Yeah, well, we like to think that, right? So when we think about exactly this, right, actuaries as relates to data scientists, another one of the concerns that we have as actuaries, so I'd love to hear your opinion, is um, ethics. So we are grounded in ethics. It is very important to us that we have those guardrails up and that we operate within them. Now, sometimes the fear is that actuaries might work a little slower or be held back a little bit because we're not just going out there,
Yeah.
guns blazing, right? Right. So, how can we navigate this world of operating quickly, innovating quickly, while still respecting the boundaries that we have with ethics?
Yes. So I think you're in a good place. I think the rest of the roles are just catching up to the need for thinking about ethics for AI. What we've seen is, and even 3 years ago, the conversation was all about how do we create value out of this data? How do we use AI to drive more value for the business? Now, because there is so many ways that AI could go rogue, the need for ethics is coming up early and early in discussions. So, the need for guardrails, the rest of the industries, the rest of functions were not as caught up as actuaries. I think everybody is going to operate with guardrails going forward. And it cuts because of AI is part of automating a little bit of our intelligence. I think, the ethics part is not as easy for AI because all our human biases get encoded. And it's really hard to develop those guardrails. There's no regulations, there's no one playbook. And this is where probably actuaries can step in and say, these are this is how you think about guardrails, and these are the different factors you should consider, and this is what guardrail looks like, right? And to use an example, say, of a chatbot, a lot of companies are putting out chatbots, and you've also seen very publicized cases where the chatbot went racist or misogynistic, right? Because AI is so much about machine learning today, the software, once you deploy it, it's still learning and evolving and changing. What that means is you might have trained it on a certain data set, and this is where the differentiation comes in with what actuaries do, is the model, once it's in production, it's still changing, and the results it shows will be different depending on the kind of data coming at it. So how do you put those guardrails in that changing world? And those conversations are being had today across industries, right? So the whole notion that we can innovate faster if we have the guardrails in place is actually becoming real, right? I would say 2 or 3 years ago, it was more about, no, guardrails can restrict innovation. But now it's more about, let's put the guardrails in place so that, the teams can run faster.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I appreciate that because it's something that's so interesting to us. Even when we think about things like variables that can be used in a model, we want to make sure that we're not using proxies for variables that are not able to be used, or variables that are against regulations. So we don't even want to find a workaround, right? We don't want to be sneaky with it. So I think that's a challenge for us for sure on how we can run with the rest. But I'm glad to hear that now more of the guardrails are starting to come up for everyone.
Yes.
All right. Gosh, there was so much that I wrote down to talk to you about. One other big area, I'm going to admit that when I found out you are a general session speaker, I went and stalked your LinkedIn. And you wrote an article that I thought was fantastic. It was called "My High Heels Don't Make Me Any Less High Tech." And I'm wondering if you can talk to us a little bit about the diversity within AI innovation and what you are seeing. Diversity and inclusion is a big deal right now to the SOA, especially as relates to our long-term growth. So I'd love to hear what direction you think the world is going in as relates to AI and diversity and inclusion.
Yeah. So, that's a great question, and actually, that's something that keeps me up at night, because I've hired several data scientists. I've set up data science teams from scratch, and it does tend to get homogeneous, right? It's very male. It's very specific race and gender. So, for me, the biggest worry is that if we don't have diversity, and not just from gender and race, from diversity of thought, diversity of backgrounds, whether it's
Yes.
cultural backgrounds, geographical backgrounds, it is so important, because we are building software that's automating a part of our intelligence. And we know humans are highly biased. I'm biased, I know it, right? So, but unless and until I get different perspectives to the table, my software, especially if it's targeted towards a consumer, is going to be flawed. It's going to be biased. I don't want my views, my biases to get amplified globally, right? So I
Right.
think the need for diversity is super important, especially for AI. Diversity has always been lacking in tech and STEM in general, but for AI, I worry, because if we don't have diversity and inclusion in AI, we're going to build highly biased models. We're going to build models that may not be complete or whole, right? Because we don't have the different backgrounds. The challenge is, there's this notion that you need somebody with a PhD in machine learning to be part of an AI team, which is not true. Like any software team or any AI team, you still need project managers, you need testers, you need software developers, you need product managers, you need these different roles, right? So I think there is a way to actually get more diverse people trained, or make them AI literate, to help them and surround these homogeneous group of data scientists with diversity, so that you are bringing in those different perspectives throughout the life cycle of AI. I think if you try to make sure that, if you try to get everybody trained to get a PhD in machine learning to be part of data, it just won't work. So that actually, kept me up so much at night, Christine, that I actually set up a nonprofit called Humans for AI, which is really focused on, driving AI literacy, focused on women and underrepresented minorities, because my fundamental belief is that you don't need to have deep technical skill sets to be part of an AI team. You still need other skill sets within an AI team. So to be able to, bring diversity through different unique channels, that's one of the ways that I'm trying to help. But it is something that I worry about a lot.
I love that. I love to hear about your organization too, because I also think that it's so important. Are you seeing other industries also have this focus on diversity in this area, or is this something that hasn't really, expanded out yet?
There is, a lot of the worlds that we operate in, a lot of it is driven by the immediate needs. So there's definitely a need to bring in diversity from a gender and race perspective. But I also think it's important to think about diversity from different backgrounds, right? And I'll give you a simple example. A robot, like if you use a Roomba, right, or a robot vacuum cleaner, right? There is AI embedded in it, and it was trained on, being able to navigate carpets and hardwood floors, and but what it didn't factor in that in some of the Eastern countries or in different geographies, people usually have sleep on the floor, right? So if there is a Roomba going on the floor, it was built in a way that when it detected hair, it sucked it in, right? So and I think that's just an example to illustrate it's more than gender and race. Those are obviously the most important, most timely right now. But as we try to solve this problem, we have to think broader, and I'm certainly seeing it across industries. The sad part is it is more of a, it's not thought of as early as it should be. It is thought of, it's more of an afterthought, but definitely a lot of awareness now more than ever.
Yeah, and certainly the diversity and inclusion will also help the ethics too, right? That sort of all comes full circle.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
I want to ask you about another thing that you talked about during your presentation, which I really liked. You talked about there are three things that are evolving, right? The technology is evolving,
Yes.
the applications of using that technology are evolving. And then you said that also the risks are evolving. So, of course, for actuaries, this is everything to us, the risk. So, can you talk a little bit about that, and perhaps even with discussion about COVID-19 and healthcare or something, if you want to focus in that area, because that's really interesting to us right now. How are those risks changing, or how will AI help evaluate new risks?
Yeah, and it's as I said, it's an evolving space because we are, there are new applications coming out every day, and we don't necessarily have diverse teams building out these applications. Not every aspect has been thought through, right? So it becomes more of a catch up game, right? To be able to once you find something has gone wrong, then you go and fix it. Though I think what I've seen work, Christine, is really, there is this human tendency, and it doesn't matter whether it's AI or any other technology. When we are building something, we can think of only all the good ways it could be used, right? If I'm building an app that is going to let me, ask a question verbally, and it's going to respond, with if I ask for directions to a specific place, right? It's just going to, as a developer, I just think about, okay, anybody can ask me questions. I'm going to listen for it and answer it with directions. So as humans, we tend to think of only the good things, right? That will be done with the app. We are at that inflection point where we need to think about what are all the ways this technology could be misused? What are all the ways this could go wrong, right? I'm using the app example, directions app example, because it's easy, it's simpler to explain. But, honestly, when Siri came out, it didn't recognize my accent. Siri did not understand a word I said, right? Because it was not trained on my kind of accent, right?
Yeah.
And it's hard. So that's where the diversity comes into play. So and that for me is a risk, right? It may not be a financial risk, but it is a risk of losing a whole user demographic, right? So
Yeah.
thinking about risks in different ways of as this space evolves, right? The ways it could be misused, the ways it could discriminate against certain demographics, or geographies. There are so many kinds of newer risks that we have not thought about. And the challenge is for us, whoever is involved in AI, and even as a consumer of AI, to think of not only all the good things that it can do, but spend that time, take that effort to actually think through what are all the ways this could go wrong.
Beena, I think our time is coming to an end. I so am inspired by everything that you told us today. Thank you so much. I do want to give you the last word. What do we have to look forward to in the future? How can we learn more? Sort of anything along this kind of forward-looking view that you want to share with us?
I'm an AI optimist, so I tend to. But optimist means I also tend to think about all the ways it could go wrong, and let's put the guardrails. So I envision AI as a technology enabling us to take education to every part of the world, right? The remotest, the poorest parts of the world. I think every child, every human deserves education. And think of, wouldn't it be great if there is this grandmother in remote Africa who has the cure for cancer in her intellect, but it's just been sitting there. It's because she's not had the education, the communication skills to actually get it out, right? So if AI can enable somebody to, get that to the forefront and help us find cure for some of the largest problems that humanity faces, that would be awesome. We are very narrowed down right now to humans who are educated, who have the skills to do this. I want AI to be able to empower every human to bring their best intelligence to the world.
I love that so much. That's so great. Beena, thank you so much for joining us today. This was so informative and interesting.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.